Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to reintroduce to you now. Shun Foreman is a returning guest on our show. Be sure to check out her first appearance on episode 74 of Boundless Body Radio. Shun Foreman has worked as a nurse for more than 2 decades before pursuing a master's degree in human rights and social justice. She noticed many instances of injustice faced by Black American communities and realized that healthcare could help shed light on the health disparities experienced by people of color. During her graduate studies, Shun focused on the history of sugar in Black communities. She traveled to sugar plantations in Louisiana and Sugarland, Texas, to learn more about convict leasing and to understand the sugar industry's role in Black American history. Her conversations with the late Reginald Moore in Sugarland and her plantation tours played a significant role in inspiring her to cut sugar from her diet, lose over 50 pounds, and raise awareness about sugar among communities of color. Shun continued her studies and became certified and licensed in holistic medicine and sugar addiction by former guest Bitten Johnson. She founded Sisters Breaking the Bonds of Sugar to raise awareness about sugar among Black Americans. Shun also serves as a sugar mentor for those who struggle with sugar, food, or carbohydrate addiction. Shun Foreman, what an absolute honor it is to welcome you back to Boundless Body Radio.
Oh, it is so cool to be back. Like, and I'm just listening to that. I'm like, whoa, that feels like literally decades ago.
You've
So I'm
done a lot of
yeah,
stuff.
yeah. Thank you. It's great to
That's
be
amazing.
back, Casey.
It is great to be back. We mentioned that you were on episode 74, which was over
Wow.
5 years ago. Can you believe that?
Whoa. When I was wondering, I was like, what episode are you on now? Because 74
Oh
is
my gosh.
crazy.
So when we started the podcast. We had to start our own company during the pandemic because we both
I
got
remember
put
that.
on unemployment by the gym. So we started our own company, started the podcast in October of 2020. And I didn't have as many clients. And so I was doing releases every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And we've been able to keep that up since October
Wow.
of 2020. So this episode that's coming out is going to be really, really close to being episode 1000. It'll be somewhere very, very close to that. I know.
Whoa.
I know.
That's crazy. Wow.
Yeah.
Congratulations on that. That's cool.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Like I said in the introduction, you were certified by Bitten Johnson. We've been able to interview her and so many people in the sugar addiction space. And so it's been amazing. You were so kind. You were so kind to send both Bethany and I a Sugar Mode Off t shirt, which I was tearing down the house trying to look for. I could not find it, unfortunately. But yeah, you were very kind to send us a t shirt. It was one of
You.
my favorites. It's a very comfortable t shirt.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'll get you another one.
Well, you're very kind. I really, really appreciate it. Like I said, we've talked to a lot of people in the sugar addiction community, but your place in this community is so unique. And I really kind of thought I knew, like from studying like Gary Taubes and like reading books like that, like I thought I knew about the history of sugar, and it goes so much deeper than I would have imagined. And your work really centers around that. It centers around the history of sugar, which I think is absolutely fascinating. I'd love to deep dive into that with you. But since it's been 5 years, can you remind us your own story, where you were brought up, what health was like, with yourself and with people in your own community, and eventually how you got into doing the work that you're doing today?
Yeah, so I was brought up in a town, Tyler, Texas, and I think just like most people at that time, I think, our parents were doing the best that they could do. We were fed well. I will say that sugar was a central part of like just me growing up, just because whenever the treats were available, um, I remember my dad, whenever we like did great things, he would tell us that he'd take us to the store so we could get Zuzus, and that was like a short term for snacks and treats. The meal on the table looked very much, when I look back, it's like, wow, it's loaded in sugar because you're going to have the primary source of protein, but it's also going to be usually carbs, and I'm saying like carbs and starch, and then bread typically. But then even on top of that, you're likely to put sugar on something. If it was rice, you're going to put sugar on top of that, and then you wash it all down with Kool-Aid and soda if you had that in the house. So that was growing up. Wasn't really concerned about weight or anything at that time because I was a very active kid. I'd like to call myself a tomboy. And it wasn't hard. Weight wasn't an issue until later on in life, and I really just kind of thought I was taking on like just the same genes or the same likeness of my family members. Um, but going through nursing school and doing all those things and being in and around health and health care and taking care of other people and also dealing with family members who had also been sick. I also just remember kind of adopting this mindset that you know, weight sort of is okay, but just kind of watch it a little bit. Do what you can, do the typical thing like exercise more, eat less, try to do all those things, but none of those things ever worked for me. We got to a point to where, I think, when I look back, I really didn't even realize that I was going off track for school. I knew that when I had that plan to go back to school, I was just like, it's got to be worth my time. It's got to be worth the sacrifice of staying away from my family because my kids were teenagers at the time. And then I need to be able to enjoy it and it needs to make sense. And so SMU had a program called, it was in the liberal studies called Human Rights and Social Justice, and that's where I was able to kind of open up my brain about just not healthcare, but just my being as a Black woman. What does that mean to be a Black woman? What does it mean to go to school right after Trayvon Martin was murdered? What does it mean to experience death and seeing death early with some people, and then also just um, maybe even thinking somehow that the value of my life was less than other people's lives just because of my blackness. Um, got through the program or got close to the end of the program and then fell in love with this topic. What I thought was going to be this paper on diabetes in Black people. I just knew for sure. I was like, this is going to be an easy A to do this thesis. And, uh, and I found very quickly that there did not need to be another paper written on Black people and diabetes because all the papers had been written. There's enough information about that. But then I kept kind of linking up to uh, uh, s- sugar and metabolic syndrome. And then, that forced me to think, what is metabolic syndrome? But at the same time, I'm also living my life. We happened to take my daughter to a summer camp in Sugar Land, Texas. And my husband asked this crazy question. Why do you think it's named Sugarland? And I was just like, you gotta know. You gotta know why it's named Sugarland. But I also think, when I look back to how the algorithm can work in your favor, I really think that because I was doing searches, Google searches on sugar and all the things, I kept getting feeds on everything that was sugar, everything. So I got a feed on Sugarland 95, and I was just like, what? Like, wait, whoa. They've come across Fort Bend ISD has come across these bodies, and this is weird. Because I'm from Texas. I'm just like I've been like my education, and I think I've had a great education background, but I had never heard about sugar in Texas. I had never heard about convict leasing in the state of Texas. And it really made me to start thinking about, okay, like Reconstruction, like this is like when you read it, it's one thing, but then when you realize that there was an impact that went beyond Reconstruction, then it made the story, like to me, come alive, and in a way that a textbook would not do ever. So one of the names that kept coming up was Reginald Moore. Reginald Moore. And I was just like, let me just try my luck at all of this. Let me try to reach out and see if I can talk to Mr. Reginald Moore. And uh, I was able to get in contact with him. I reached out to the archivist at Rice University who held his number and contact with him. And her name is Amanda. And Amanda said, sure, I'll have him to call you. And lo and behold, he called me. And once he called, we just started talking. And I felt like I had this exclusive seat in a lecture hall and that I could just ask this professor any question I wanted to. And over time, we talked so much. And I think honestly, Mr. Moore got tired of me. Like he was just like, if you want to know some more, then come to Texas. I mean, come to Sugar Land. And so I did. I was like, Mom, you want to roll? And she was like, yeah. So we went down to Sugar Land, Texas. And I had the opportunity not just to talk with them, but to experience like some of the ways he had adapted to history, and knowing like that there were some things that would never be written in a history book. He had done like over 20 years of like research and knew a lot about the penitentiary system. He had worked in the penitentiary system that was once a camp for prisoners, and that was once a plantation. So he just had a lot of different perspectives on like even how the land was parceled off. This piece of land over here actually had a plantation on it. The plantation was named this, the house was this, the owner was this. And he just started making things connect for me. And I just remember a pivotal moment for me was actually standing at the old Imperial Cemetery, and we just had a deep conversation about the lives that were lost, the history that may not ever be revealed. And I remember him looking, because he's this really tall guy, and he he was struggling with his health at that time, and I don't think I had put it all together, you know what I'm saying? But I remember him looking at me and just saying, you need to keep doing the work that you're doing, because I never made the connection between sugar and my health. And that really like opened my eyes up to like, wow, like I don't think I had put it together then either. I think I was really consumed with just like, oh, I've got this topic. I knew I could trace it back to slavery. And this is that point where we were free, but not really free. You got the 13th Amendment that could literally treat people like slaves if they were criminals. And we've got this system of the state of Texas working together with these wealthy landowners, and a prison system that is now made for them to now do the work that once were done by slaves. But he put all those things together, and I think it just really gave me the motivation I needed to change my behavior with sugar on that day. Like on that particular day, I changed my behavior. Um, I also know that another thing that kind of hit me in a different way was when I called back to speak with him. His wife answered the phone, and the weird thing is, I didn't know he was married. I never thought about it. I don't even know if he knew that I was married, because we just had these conversations about history, and and like, well, why was this way, and do you think this was like this? And when I called back and his wife answered the phone, and she said, Reggie just passed away, and we just had his funeral, and I was just like, you got to be kidding me. Like you've got to be kidding me. So that was another moment to me, because I don't think I had just put it all together that he was as sick as he was. And the fact that the last conversation I had with him, he told me that he had not made the connection between sugar and his own health. And um, it just blew my mind in a way that it still sticks with me today. And I still think of him as sort of the champion of my work. Because if it had not been for him, I don't know if that passion for my own health or change would have been ignited. I don't know that. And so I always think about him when I'm doing the work, and then carrying on that work, because I told him before, I said, I think I'm going to go, and visit the plantations near New Orleans. He said, you should do that. And you could almost tell that if he had the time, he would have done it himself. So, and I did that. And that was just another level of awareness of history that, of course, I think people, especially me, I'm just such a gotta go see it, gotta go touch it, gotta go feel it type person to really understand the depth of history. And for me, that was where I kind of understood, like, wow, connecting the stories of Sugarland, Texas, where I thought like Texas where cotton is king. And then putting that together with the history of those plantations that I toured near New Orleans, it just made me think, whoa, like it's one thing to read about historical erasure, but it's another thing to feel it, because that came with a whole different thing of just feeling what it means to say that we're not going to worry about these lies, that we're going to focus on the master's narrative of this house, or and not really tell people that it was actually shaped by the work of enslaved Africans. So that was another point for me. After putting all that together, and then I've got to force this paper out and get it done and graduate. That's when I went to Bitten's program, and that was she opened up her program talking about that freaking addiction was the root word comes from adicere, in Latin means to be enslaved, and I was like, peace. Like, so, and then that's how I'm here today is really just forcing my way through the curiosity of sugar and still just being willing to let sugar take me to new levels, or new understandings, and that's where I am today.
Wow. It's absolutely fascinating. Thank you for sharing all of that. I've got so many questions. You okay? So going back to the beginning, you mentioned that there are lots of studies linking Black communities with diabetes, and
Mhm.
I'm aware of that. But I'm a nutrition coach and have been for a long time, and I've been paying attention to this topic for a while. Do you think that's very common knowledge inside Black communities, or is it even though there's a lot of information about it? Do you think it's actually reaching them at any like conceivable level?
No, I don't believe so. I think even when you put out a statistic, say 1 out of 3 people, uh, there's still something very inherent about believing that you've inherited the genes of your family members. I don't know, other than just talking about it and talking about the term medical fatalism, that you just believe deeply, like, um, that when you gain weight or when you develop diabetes, that you're doing so and almost in honor of the gene pool, and not in a way, in a good way, but just saying, well, grandmama had it. Grandmama's a great person, so of course I was going to develop diabetes. It's something in the gene. So I don't think that that information is out there. I don't know that even if it were to be put out there, it probably just needs to be spun differently so that people can really understand, like, that the American Heart Association knows, like, the statistics on diabetes and we're wrapped up in it. They know the statistics on hypertension and we're wrapped up in that. Um, but I also think when you can look to the right or the left, in front of you and back of you, and see someone who has diabetes, it's just, it's almost like, what makes you think you're any better?
Yeah,
You know? I,
yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does. That's really well explained. You mentioned being brought up, and I haven't thought about Kool-Aid in a long time. I learned later in life, my family, whenever we would make it, we were actually adding double the recommended amount of sugar for
Sure.
each batch. And you'd put it, you're right, you put it on everything. Like the toast, you put, I can't believe it's not butter. And we'd have the
Mhm.
shaker with the sugar and cinnamon that you put on there. I never put it on rice. Maybe I'll try that next. But yeah, it's crazy how
Don't try it.
prevalent. Yeah, it's crazy how prevalent it was. I don't eat the rice anyway, so we're good. Um,
Right.
can you tell me a little bit more about Reginald? Was he also in the Black community? Like, what was his kind of interest there? It sounds like that was a really special and important relationship to you.
Yeah, it was. I call him a historian because by when I met him, I believe he had retired from his work, which I don't know what his last job was, but I do know that he worked in the prison system, and he started to take notice of how, and this was like in the early 80s when he was working at that prison system, but he took note of how prisoners were actually being treated in the 80s. And he made mention of being witness to seeing like uh, basically like what do you call them, guards, or I guess the prison people who watch the prisoners, how they would ride out in the fields on these white horses, and they would happen to be white men, and then you've got all these black prisoners. And so I look at him as a historian, but also a preservationist, someone who was really trying to preserve history, but also the memorial sites, the burial grounds. His work was really significant in trying to make sure that Fort Bend ISD did the right thing and at least didn't just, you know, take these bodies and move them somewhere else, but he wanted those sites to be memorialized. So I think his work went beyond what we might ever really know or hear about, especially in history books. But yeah, he was, he was my 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 history teacher. You know, he was my history teacher.
Uh, And then you mentioned his poor health. Do you know how he passed?
It was some heart conditions. Yeah.
Okay, got it. That you could imagine would be related to sugar and sugar consumption in some level. Okay. Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. He sounds like a very special person. And yeah, so I think most of us think about slavery and we think about cotton as the primary kind of thing. And I didn't really know much about sugar in the Americas. Can you tell us a little bit about that history, like mechanically, kind of practically, like how it worked? You mentioned the slaves coming from Africa. Of course, they get shipped over here. You heard that those voyages were horror stories. And then, yeah, tell us a little bit about the history of sugar here in America.
Yeah. I always think about just the beginning of sugar, for one, that it was never really meant to be something that commoners would have. It was actually a luxury, thing. And so the way that I've read about it, especially in, I think it's Sweetness and Power, uh, to think that it's now in communities of color, uh, it's wild to me. It's almost like nobody ever expected it to be there. Um, but knowing that it was a luxury item, and then once the slave trade happened, or started to take place by just with the work of sugar, it always fascinates me that I remember reading that of the 12 million or so Africans who were forced into slavery, 70% of them went into sugar colonies.
Wow.
So it even makes me think about just being shaped as someone who has some of African descent. Like, I'm always wondering because I don't know. Like, do I have any ancestors like that did the work? Uh, I don't know. The weird thing is my husband says you're probably the only person that wants to know that. Like, and I'm like, I just think that like 70% is a lot. That's like 8.4 million people.
A lot. A lot more than I would have assumed.
Yeah. So, and that's if we kept up with the number of bodies, but just me understanding that it was never meant to come to my community in the first place. But then when the industry started to rise, that it was built off of the backs of those who were enslaved. And then even taking it further and saying, woo, if we overconsume it and then we then have the consequences or the complications of overconsuming it, then sugar ain't ever been good for us. It ain't ever
No,
been good.
Oh, especially like you said, in the quantities that we have it available. It was never available the way that it is.
Right, right. So, and then just even by design of it being something that is actually manufactured in a way for our taste, and and the way the reward system works in the brain, it's wild. It is wild to me.
That's crazy. What was the work like? Could you get a good sense of kind of like the day to day of somebody who was enslaved on a sugar plantation? And also, I want to know too, like what were they growing? Was it beets or was it cane or was it a little bit of both? Like, what did that look like?
No, I don't. So I think the beats came a little bit later, like earlier in time. I don't know too much about beats as a historical reference, but I do remember going to the plantations in New Orleans or near that area, I should say, and I remember the tour guide saying that this was work that literally started before the sun rose, before sunrise, and it ended after sunset. And I was just like, so, and me being a nurse and working 12-hour shifts, I mean, that's the way that's the way the shifts are. You're in the building usually at like right at the crack of dawn, and then you come out and the day is gone almost. The light is almost gone. And I'm just like, that's a lot of work with no AC. We're talking about the weather had to be heat. You have to be in heat for sugar to grow successfully. It typically took humidity or areas where the humidity was really high. It was often in areas where floods occurred normally. Hurricanes hit often. Um, Swampy. Um, Snakes, uh, infestations of mosquitoes. That was the work. And then often people died of what they said was heat stroke, if not, infection. So yeah, it's always weird to hear people talk and to read about the history of sugar in a way where they separate like that this slavery was totally different from even um, cotton because and especially because they said that the work was really hard mechanically. You're talking about people swinging blades. They would often get cut and cut off limbs, get infections from those, bleed out. So the work was really gruesome. Um, I think one of the things that stands out in my recollection about reading, I think there's a book called, what is the name of that book? One Dies, Get Another. Was It's a book, I can't remember the name of the author, but it basically talks about convict leasing and it really talks about it being worse than slavery because how easy was it just to get another criminal? All you needed to do was to charge someone with a petty crime, walking on the wrong side of the street, looking at a white woman in her eyes, stealing a horse or stealing some bread, you know, then we can lock them up for these petty crimes and then force them to do that work with convict leasing. So, um, in particular, they call the Brazos that area where in Sugarland, uh, I think they call it the Brazos of hell. It was that bad.
Wow.
It was that bad. The prison system was that bad. The work was that bad. The labor was that bad. The deaths, the rate that people were dying in prisons were it's high. It's
Wow.
awful.
I was not aware of that book, but just by the title, One Dies, Get Another, that's like chilling. Wow. That's terrible. Is now the best time in the time frame to ask you about convict leasing? Until your work, I had not heard that term before. Is this a good place to ask you what that is?
Yeah, yeah, you sure can. I let me say that I think I heard about convict leasing through, it seems like there was a documentary. I believe that documentary was the 13th Amendment. I think that's the name of the documentary. And they made mention of just how the 13th Amendment was written and that this was basically one of the ways that you could treat a person as someone who was enslaved is if they were a criminal. And that documentary opened my eyes, but I don't think that it really made me understand it until because I connected it to like Alabama or Mississippi. I had not made a connection to Texas because nobody had ever said anything about convict leasing in Texas. And it wasn't until I talked to Mr. Moore and he made it very clear that this was the way the prison system worked for this particular system. Because if you can think about before emancipation, that the wealthy landowners and those who had those sugarcane crops, um, they had slaves, they had people to do the work. But then after people are free, then they have a workforce problem. And so to understand it on a bigger level, it's just like, okay, now we can have this amendment that fits the bill of like, yeah, they can still go back into slavery if they have committed a crime. And so that's how that system worked. I don't know how big convict leasing was in the state of Texas. That's something that honestly, I'm just thinking about the answer to it right now. I do know that that it was one of the systems that worked for sugarcane in the state of Texas. And the the background or the foundation of what we know is imperial sugar. That's that they had there's an old imperial sugar there, refinery there. So it's just always amazing to me that, when you don't know history, that I don't know, I don't know if the word is hurt as much as it is like, are you trying to make sure I'm disabled? You know what I'm saying? Like, because we have to be honest, even if people do know the history, not everybody wants to cut sugar. I get it. But knowing it definitely opens my eyes up to the way that it was made, the exploitation that took place, the lives that were lost, and even how populations moved around or they stopped, because we do know that the work of anyone who was forced into sugar work was about 4 to 5 years time span. Anyone who was put
Before,
into, so if they went in as a 14-year-old, they're not going to see their 19th birthday typically.
oh, wow,
That's how hard and difficult the work was. You're going to die your way out of it.
wow. Yeah, I had no idea it was that brief. That is tragic. And I think most of us think like, okay, we have emancipation and poof, slavery's done. We're good. You guys go get jobs. Everything's fine. Whatever. And of course, these are major economic drivers. This was the whole economy and an eventual cause for the war, the Civil War to some extent. Like it must have been a very dicey, shaky kind of um, kind of a transition away from slavery. It's not like you can just flip a switch and be like, hey, we're good. We're not going to do this anymore. We're fine.
Right? We're not going to pay people.
Yeah.
Like it's like, oh, yeah, there's just so much that could be said about it. But it definitely does tie you into the politics of it all, right? And the careful ways that you can interpret things nowadays, and like the reason to vote, and even just sugar itself. Like it's such a big industry. It's so big. Like now we're not even talking about sugarcane as much. We talk about beets or we talk about corn, and just how that industry has evolved and the machinery that it takes, the subsidies that are given out, just to make sure that it can be processed, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. As we transition this conversation from more of the history, which again, I really appreciate you getting into because I was very under aware of all that stuff, to more the health side, I want to go back to your decision that you yourself were going to step away from sugar and get off of it. Was that decision driven by the health side of things, or is that driven by the history side of things?
No, it definitely wasn't driven by the health side. It literally was my silent way of protesting, something that I knew had such a historical way of shaping Black people and Black communities. And then when I further, getting into books, like there's so many books that we can talk about with history, but the different books will just not just show that it wasn't just, Sugarland. This was the Hawaii. This was the Cuba, Brazil, all of somehow where Black people were. And I was just like, this is crazy because I mean, if we talk about Haiti today and Jamaica today, that you know we can definitely say that uh, there was definite exploitation goes that went on. And so that to me on the human rights and social justice side of me was more of a reason to stay away.
Got it.
I did not know. I had no, I wasn't trying to do like this diet thing. Because I had tried everything before, Weight Watchers and all, fasting, and I never could fast past 24 hours back in those days. But um, I had tried my own way of just attacking my health, and I just thought I was just going to go down the road of health. And then once I started pulling away from sugar, that's when I was like, oh, like I feel better. And it took me some time to really make the connection to like, whoa, I am losing weight. Or whoa, my numbers have gone to, my blood pressure's going down. I'm not pre-hypertensive anymore. Or uh it took me some time. It wasn't like overnight or, when the scale showed a certain number that I was even thinking health wise. But then Bitten's program, that's when really I would say if there was a gap or a hole between like the history, my personal decision to drop sugar or to cut sugar, and then Bitten putting on that other piece, which was looking at sugar differently. It wasn't because I was still consuming rice, I was still consuming bread, I was still, all those things, and you're like, oh yeah, damn carbs, fancy way of saying sugar, It's like, and then over time is when I started to reach new levels of calmness and the anxiety, you know, all of that is so much different than Sugar Shun. Like I'm just a different person because my anxiety was high. I always like to tell people I'm baseline a very nervous person, but being off of sugar, I'm like, okay, let's go. Let's roll. You let's just see, you know?
Yeah. Well, I prefer this version of Shun for sure. You're very chill and
Yeah.
I love the way you present everything. So we'll keep it that way. Tell us about Bitten's program and what specific things stand out as far as like things you learned about the addictiveness of sugar itself.
Yeah, I think for one, Bitten is a registered nurse. So we bonded right off the bat. And I think me identifying myself as I already knew before even going to the program that I had an addictive personality. Like if we were to go to the restaurants we used to go to back in the day, I would get the same thing over and over again, no change. As this, it always worked. The only thing is I probably drink more soda. But so I think those things like right off the bat, like were a connection for myself and Bitten. But then the program, what stands out is just that if you are curious about sugar and the harm that it's capable of, then it like gave you a new door every time we attended a class. You thinking about your skin? Yeah, of course. You thinking about collagen? Yes, of course. You thinking about your blood pressure? Yes, of course. So all of these things, but I don't think anything worked better for me than understanding that it's the wiring of the brain. Because when you try to quit sugar, there's still this pull. Even if you quit it for a long time, there's this pull to say, you know, I think I could just do just a little bit, right? You know, and then you go through that monkey mind of just trying to make yourself think that you're okay with it, and before you know it, you're wanting a bowl of ice cream that you hadn't wanted in years. So I think the way she presented and the way that the course was taught to teach about the brain and how the brain has to be rewired. The only way you can do that is to just cut sugar. And just talking about that reptilian theory of the brain and how, to me, I think of them as she calls them forces, which is talking about even your gut lining and how the pancreas has its own function. Um, all of those things to me stand out because they're all working without having to worry about the decision of another organ. That brain, it's not even worried about the dopamine hit, ain't worried about what the reptilian brain or the theory of it all working is going to do. It's not worried about the pancreas either and whether or not those enzymes are going to be released uh, or or insulin is going to flood the system. None of that is concerned with the other one. So I just think it's all fascinating because if you've got that kind of brain where you go down the rabbit hole, there's so many rabbit holes to go down. you know,
Yeah.
that's what the course was about to me. It was just being able to go down the rabbit hole. So yeah.
Well, again, we mentioned that it's kind of a supply issue. Like it drove an entire cruel economy of slavery. That's how much work it takes to get at sugar, and that's why it just wasn't ever that available. And it hits those parts of your brain because it's supposed to be so exceedingly rare that you hardly ever get it, or you get it extremely seasonally in a tiny piece of fruit. And understanding, what you just said, like the sugar addiction part, I can't say whether I'm addicted to sugar or not, but I know for me, it goes down to even just like having fruit. Like I would never say like, oh, fruit's like the worst thing for everybody, but I know for me, when I have it, I get really severe cravings afterwards, and I don't want another piece of fruit. I want a chocolate cake and a candy bar, and I'm a little bit more irritable, and my anxiety does come back. For me, it's just so much easier on carnivore, which I've been on for 7 years, to just avoid the whole thing and say, like, this isn't my food. If I have it, I just get really hungry and I start to feel that up and down of the blood sugar, and it's just really uncomfortable once you've stepped away from
Yep. That's so true.
it.
That is so true. I mean, and that's what's weird about it is because you even think about just it's it's bigger than just like talking about sugar. It's just like looking at what our bodies could tolerate, right? And just you look back at the ancestors and they didn't have, now laters and and Snickers bars and all of that. So and the processing of all of that makes it even more of a problem, right? So yeah, it's really weird because I definitely know that my anxiety and picking, pulling, like nails, biting things, it's it's so linked to sugar. And I
Yeah.
always think of like the body is doing something on the inside, which is all those systems working and out of whack, trying to figure out how to regulate itself, you know, how to regulate itself. So yeah.
Yeah. Between the last time that we've chatted and now, I've kind of had a favorite question I like to ask medical professionals, and generally it's in emergency care or ICUs. but I think it applies to all medical care. So, in your general opinion, it's probably impossible to know exactly, but in your general opinion, what you see and take care of as a nurse related to chronic disease, lifestyle generated chronic disease versus acute injuries, for example, or something that's an emergency now versus something that is related to chronic disease. What percentage would you say each one of those are that you have to deal with?
Ooh, wow. Well, that's a good question. I would definitely say, what I'm thinking about right now is like even those that come in with acute issues have some type of chronic. I don't like to do this, but I'm going to put a hard 60 to 70% are
Okay.
chronic. I don't know what everybody else is saying. And
So that is based on what I've asked people, and again, it's mostly in like emergency care, so people like frontline. The number I almost always get consistently back is like 85%, somewhere
I
between
will
80 90.
let me tell you why I wouldn't go that far is because I see a lot of babies delivered. Not me particular, but our hospital, we have a lot of babies there. So that
Got it.
that is
Excuse it.
that is the only reason. But if I were to break that down, I could definitely buy into the 70, 80.
Yeah, well, and 60 to 70 is not a small number either.
Right.
That's a very, very high number. You decided to, obviously you're very, very busy doing nursing. You decided to kind of take this on and help people with this. How are you able to help people? Like, sugar is addictive. It's very difficult to get off of it. It tastes amazing. Like we talk about all the time on this show. Like, we have this message. We found healing for ourselves by stepping away. We want to share it. We want to get it out there. And even people who are like really, really, really sick, directly linked to sugar. There's a lot of them that don't want to hear anything about getting off of sugar. But sugar tastes really good. There's a reason why people eat it to their own detriment of their health, and they will go through so much suffering. How are you able to help people kind of step off the sugar train?
Well, I will say, like, I'm pretty sure that the last time we talked, I had started the Sisters Breaking the Bonds of Sugar Facebook group. And I started that Facebook group not really aware so much what I was doing. What I knew I was doing was just trying to share sugar awareness with them because I felt it was such a heavy weight for me to just carry on my own. And I felt like I was walking around with a secret, and the secret worked for me, and I needed to share it with everybody. And that was just really just giving people as much information as I could about sugar awareness. So that all came by way just talking about link like those rabbit holes in Bitten's course. Like, okay, this thing can be linked to eczema. This thing can be linked to uh your insulin resistance or PCOS, all of that. So just making people aware that a high sugar intake can lead to disease, uh, but then also letting people know what sugar is, because I think that's a misconception. It's like to think, oh, when you tell a person that sugar is not good for you, that they've got it all figured out. And that's not true. You got to tell them that, oh, that the artificial sweetener is going to reward your brain, just like, and then brown sugar is the same as table sugar, white sugar. And not just that, but the xanthan gum. And then, oh, yep, guess what? The flour, yep, almond flour, it's once it's in your system, it's going to be converted into a carbohydrate, which is just going to be a sugar. So, that broad level of awareness, I've done that work since 2019. And now the way I try to help people is those who feel like they want to go off into group coaching or either one-on-one coaching, I do that for them. Um, there is still some resistance in beliefs, and it's I think just being a coach for a couple of years now, I realize that I'm really having to fight philosophies. People come in with their own food philosophy and they think moderation is going to help. And I'm like, you got to get out of this this state of inflammation. You got to do that. So when you do that, then we can talk about some of the other things. But you are not in the position to say that you still want to have sugar moderately because first of all, you don't know what moderate is because there is no moderation. You know what I'm saying? There is no moderation. So um it's it's really kind of tough because even though it might sound like, oh, well, Shun, a bunch of, let's just call it what it is, a bunch of black people that need the help, but why can't you help them? And if the food philosophy is that um, I'm still gonna eat at what I ate, but I'm just gonna eat less, then I haven't sold them,
Yeah.
on the idea. So, and it takes a lot of time, but the good thing is the clients that I do have, they have they listen and it works out as a benefit for them. Of course, there's some tugging and pulling and learning how to get back up on the horse and ride it the right way, but um I still say that teaching a person to cut sugar is better than not teaching them. So that's the way I have to roll with it. It's still better than not teaching them.
Yeah, I'm learning that lesson that it's really nearly impossible to moderate. It is a really tough lesson to learn and thinking like, oh, I'm going to have to do this for the rest of my life. I'm never going to be able to do it. And it's like, no, no, no. Just think about doing it for today. you know, do it for right now and then just wait because you will start to feel better. The inflammation that you mentioned will start to go down. You'll be more and more motivated to continue because you feel so good. And it will punish you severely when you go back to it to the point to like kind of remind you, like, oh, this is why I took this out of my life. And I feel so much better having it out for sure. Tell us. So you said you mentioned you work in small groups. Is there like a particular like time frame? Do you work with people like a particular like detox for a certain amount of time? Like, what does your group work look like?
So the group work is really just trying to make sure that people get in and for that first 30 days, that they are really learning how to just eat from a whole foods list. That's pretty much it. And then whenever they're feeling like those cravings, I always tell them to float towards the hydration and the protein and the fats. And that way they can get what they need instead of going for the snack, 'cause and so, what we do in that group is we just work together. Luckily, I've got some who have evolved and they could really be out there and coaching on their own, but they are really positive impact. And if they see somebody slipping down in the group, they'll be like, okay, I got you. They've started to partner up and be sort of sponsors for each other. And then we meet up like once a week to do Zoom calls to where we're just basically checking in for accountability. I call it like our pack meetings, which is just partnering, accountability, and also collaboration so that nobody feels alone. Nobody feels alone. And then the one-on-one work, that's just meeting with them once a week for 30 minutes. And we're talking about their issues and what they're going to face and how to swerve, how to move, like, girl, how to duck, how to dodge, So, yeah.
That's amazing. Well, it's incredible work. You will understand this at such a different level than I would ever be able to. But to take all of this in and to travel to the places where this was happening, that must I can't even imagine what that was like. The heaviness of being around that, just being in that space, and then going out and telling that story. It must have been just so incredibly difficult, but I'm so grateful that you were able to go out and do that, to take that on and then share the message because it is important in all the different ways, excuse me, that we've talked about it today, the history and also the health side of things. And so I love your message. Please let's
Thank you.
not let this go another 5 years before we chat
It
again.
won't.
You are absolutely lovely, and I love chatting with you. I'm
Thank
so
you.
grateful for you and all of your work. Tell our audience where they can go to find you and connect with you and your work.
Yeah, the easiest place to connect with me is through Instagram, and it's so weird because you can have a website, and I do have a website, but I feel like I'm on Instagram a little bit more, and you can find me there at Sugar Mode Off. And also, you can also email me at sugarmodeoff@gmail.com. I think the other thing is just no question is a dumb question. I still ask questions that probably Bitten is just like, girl, I thought I taught you that. And I'm like, hey, the other part of my brain wasn't working at that time. So it's just always it's always good to get questions because it really does wake up, the side of me that's somehow forgotten what it means to start over. You know what I'm saying? So I
Yeah.
love new beginning questions. I love when somebody's curious enough to try a detox or to go without it. Um, I love when people go through it and then they're like, girl, I tried to have, the piece of cake. And they're like, I got sick as a dog. And I'm like, I don't know what you think. You think you're going to so I'm always so grateful just to help people to see the light, as much light as they can with sugar. But yeah, those are the best ways to find me. Also, if anybody's on Facebook, and especially women, any woman can go to Sisters Breaking the Bonds of Sugar, and you can just say that request to get in the group, and I'll let you in. That work is really just awareness work. And so yeah, I'm always just I'm grateful, honestly, Casey, that I'm still having fun, and that I'm still finding new ways to improve my health. Um, I think one of the biggest misconceptions is like, oh, you're healthy now. And it's like, no, you just go to a new level. Now the next level is really just trying to reach uh, a different physical level of my health. And so I'm always just grateful to keep learning and techniques of breathing and things like that that have really been helpful in just me feeling better.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing. We will be sure that all of that is linked up in the show notes so people can find you and your amazing work. We really, really appreciate you, Sean. Thank you so very much for everything you've done, and thank you so much for coming back on our show today. We really appreciate
Thank
you.
you. Thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely, it was such an honor. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.